the brick at my face before I even realized my father had picked it up. One moment, I was standing outside my parents' house in the light blue dress I had bought for what I believed would be a joyful family dinner. I was finally going to tell everyone that my fiancé, Ethan Carter, and I had chosen our wedding date. The next moment, a sharp explosion of pain ripped through my head. Something warm streamed down my cheek. My knees gave out beneath me, and pieces of broken brick scattered across the driveway. The scream that echoed through the yard sounded distant until I realized it was coming from me. Ethan caught me before I crashed onto the porch steps, holding me tightly while blood soaked through his white shirt faster than either of us could understand. I tried to open my left eye, but all I found was darkness. My right eye barely focused long enough to see my mother standing near the porch swing. Instead of rushing toward me or calling for help, she was laughing. It was not nervous laughter or the reaction of someone in shock. She actually looked amused. Then, she turned toward Ethan and calmly said that now they would finally see if he still loved me. My father dropped the broken brick onto the lawn with a satisfied expression, as though he had simply finished another chore around the house. Ethan looked at both of them in complete disbelief before asking what they had just done, but nobody answered him. My younger sister Madison walked out of the house looking annoyed that dinner had been interrupted rather than concerned that I was bleeding across the front yard. My father finally broke the silence by pointing at Madison and telling Ethan he had chosen the wrong daughter. Those words hurt even more than the blow to my face. My mother immediately agreed, claiming that I had always been difficult while Madison deserved someone like Ethan far more than I ever did. My sister folded her arms with complete confidence, acting as though everyone should naturally agree with them. Ethan knelt beside me and pressed his jacket against my wound, begging me not to speak while he searched desperately for someone to call for help. Across the street, an elderly neighbor opened her front door after hearing the commotion, but my father shouted that it had simply been a family accident. She hesitated for a moment before disappearing back inside, leaving me terrified that no one would believe what had really happened. Ethan reached for his phone to call 911, but my father kicked it across the driveway, smashing the screen into pieces. Before Ethan could react, my father rushed at him, knocking both of them into the flower beds. My mother and sister simply watched without trying to stop the fight. They acted as though every second had already been planned. While they struggled on the ground, my father shouted that Ethan would either marry Madison or leave our family forever. Ethan answered with a punch that landed squarely across my father's jaw before shouting that he loved only me and would never abandon me. My sister stepped closer with a cold smile and confidently told him that he would eventually change his mind once he realized which sister was truly worth choosing. Even through the unbearable pain, I knew this was not a sudden argument. It was the final chapter of something that had been building my entire life. Ever since I was a little girl, my parents had treated Madison as though she could do no wrong while I existed only to sacrifice everything for her. Whenever she wanted one of my toys, it became hers. If she ruined something that belonged to me, I was expected to apologize for upsetting her. When I earned a full college scholarship through years of hard work, my father called me selfish for leaving home. But when Madison quit school after only one semester, my mother proudly told everyone she was searching for her true purpose. Every achievement I earned somehow became her reward, while every mistake she made somehow became my responsibility. I spent years convincing myself that maybe I was imagining the unfair treatment, but lying in my own blood outside that house made it impossible to deny the truth any longer. Eventually, Ethan managed to push my father away and ran toward the street, waving frantically at a passing pickup truck. A gray-haired electrician slammed on his brakes, jumped out, and took one look at me before immediately pulling out his phone. My father tried to stop him too, but the man warned that he would tell emergency dispatch everything if anyone came another step closer. For the first time all evening, my father looked uncertain. 7 endless minutes later, the ambulance finally arrived. Paramedics surrounded me, asking questions while carefully lifting the blood-soaked jacket from my face. The moment they saw the damage, their expressions changed completely. One of them quietly called for a trauma team, and I watched fear spread across Ethan's face. He climbed into the ambulance beside me despite being told there was no room because he refused to leave me alone. As the ambulance doors closed, I looked one last time toward my parents' house. My mother stood with one arm around Madison while my father calmly watched us drive away. None of them looked frightened or ashamed. They looked irritated that their evening had been interrupted. Just before the ambulance pulled away, I noticed someone standing behind the living room curtain. It was an elderly man I had never seen before. He stared directly at me, slowly raised one trembling hand against the window, and then disappeared behind the curtain. I had no idea who he was or why he seemed so desperate to reach me. But before I could think any longer, everything faded into darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I noticed was the steady sound of machines and the unbearable pain spreading across the left side of my face. Ethan was sitting beside my bed wearing the same blood-stained shirt from the attack. His eyes were swollen from crying, but the moment I opened my eye, he reached for my hand and promised he had not left my side for a single minute. The surgeon explained that I had suffered a fractured eye socket, more than 60 stitches, and serious swelling that made it impossible to know whether my vision would fully recover. Those words terrified me, but having Ethan beside me gave me enough strength to keep fighting. Later that day, a detective named Daniel Brooks arrived to take my statement. He gently asked whether my father had attacked me on purpose, and I answered without hesitation. Then he asked why my parents wanted Ethan to leave me for my sister. That question unlocked months of painful memories. Everything had changed after Ethan sold his construction company and became financially successful. My parents suddenly welcomed him into the family, not because they cared about him, but because they saw an opportunity. Madison started appearing everywhere he went, pretending every meeting was an accident. She sent messages from different phone numbers after he blocked her, mailed gifts he always returned, and even waited outside our apartment offering him the future she claimed I could never give him. When Ethan rejected every attempt, my parents convinced themselves that if they could somehow ruin my appearance, he would eventually choose Madison instead. While Detective Brooks was still writing his report, a nurse announced that my parents and sister had arrived demanding to see me. Ethan immediately refused, and the detective stepped into the hallway to deal with them. Even from inside my room I could hear my father shouting that I had embarrassed the family and my mother insisting I owed everyone an apology. Then the detective's voice became much colder as he revealed that several witnesses had already given statements, including the electrician who called 911, the emergency medical team, and a neighbor whose security camera recorded the attack. The moment my father whispered that someone needed to delete the recording, officers placed him in handcuffs. As they led my family away, the same elderly man I had seen behind the curtain quietly stepped forward and said he had waited more than 20 years for this day. His name was Walter Lawson, and once we were alone, he revealed that he had been my grandfather's closest friend. He carried a weathered briefcase filled with things that immediately changed everything I believed about my past. Inside were dozens of birthday letters my grandfather had written for me before he died. Walter explained that my grandfather knew he was running out of time and had asked him to deliver one letter every year. My father had threatened him into staying away, so he protected every letter instead of risking never seeing me again. Walter also handed me a small key to a safety deposit box, saying my grandfather no longer trusted his own son and wanted me to discover the truth when the time was right. Hearing that someone had loved me enough to write those letters every year broke something inside me that years of abuse never could. Before I had time to process everything, Detective Brooks returned with even more shocking news. Officers searching my parents' house had discovered notebooks filled with plans about Ethan, copies of his interviews, photographs of his daily routine, and handwritten notes describing how changing my face would convince him to choose Madison. The attack had not been a burst of anger, it had been carefully planned for months. As we struggled to understand how anyone could be so cruel, the hospital phone rang. The caller introduced herself as my father's younger sister, someone I had never even known existed. She explained that my grandfather had rewritten his will years earlier after discovering my father had repeatedly stolen from the family business. According to the will, if my father ever committed serious violence against one of his own children, every protected family asset would automatically pass to that child instead of him. By attacking me, he had destroyed the fortune he spent his entire life trying to protect. Over the following weeks my recovery slowly continued. Doctors confirmed that my eyesight would return, though the scars on my face would never disappear completely. The criminal investigation became stronger with every passing day as witnesses confirmed exactly what had happened, and the evidence proved the assault had been planned. My parents and Madison eventually accepted responsibility rather than facing a public trial, receiving lengthy prison sentences along with permanent orders preventing any future contact with me. The inheritance my grandfather had protected for decades finally became mine. But instead of celebrating, I honored the man who had truly loved me. I restored his name to the family hardware store, created scholarships for young tradespeople, and preserved the lakeside cabin he had built with his own hands. Several months later, Ethan and I visited my grandfather's grave carrying fresh flowers and the first birthday letter he had ever written for me. His final message reminded me that people who refuse to love us reveal their own broken hearts, not our value. As I looked across the peaceful lake afterward, Ethan smiled and jokingly asked if I still wanted to marry him after everything we had survived. I laughed for the first time in months and told him I had never doubted his love. The only thing I questioned was whether he would ever stop making terrible jokes. His laughter echoed across the water, and for the first time in my life, I realized that family is not defined by blood. It is defined by the people who choose to stand beside you when the rest of the world turns away. That day I finally stopped measuring my worth through the people who tried to destroy me and started building a future with the people who had fought to save me.